Poor nutrition leads to lower energy, muscle weakness, dehydration, and unstable blood sugar, all of which increases risk of falls.
In this film, we're going to explain how your body processes the food you eat in order to provide all your body cells with the energy they need. And also what happens when you have diabetes and this system doesn't work properly. When you eat food that contains carbohydrate, it's broken down in the stomach and digestive system into glucose, which is a type of sugar. We need glucose from food because that's what gives us energy. Carbohydrate-containing foods are things like starchy foods, sugary foods, milk and some dairy products, and fruit. This glucose then moves into the bloodstream, and the body detects that the blood glucose level is rising. In response to that, the pancreas, which is a little gland that sits just underneath the stomach, starts to release a hormone called insulin. And it's insulin that helps our body get the energy from the food we eat. The bloodstream then takes the glucose and the insulin to every cell in our body that needs it. To make this easier to understand, let's look at muscle cells. At the muscle cells, it's insulin that allows the glucose to get into the cells where it can be used for energy. It's a bit like insulin is a key unlocking the door to the cells so the glucose can get in. That way, the blood glucose level starts to drop. But the blood glucose level can be topped up at any point by the liver releasing extra glucose that it has stored. The blood glucose rises again, and again the pancreas produces more insulin to move with that glucose through the bloodstream to the muscle cells, open the doors and let the glucose in. The body functions best with the blood glucose at an optimum level. It doesn't like it if the blood glucose rises too high. Normally, there's a cycle within the body which balances out the glucose and the insulin level, and this is achieved by the food you eat, the pancreas, and the liver. However, in some people, the system doesn't work properly and they develop diabetes. There are two main types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. In type 1 diabetes, the body isn't making any insulin at all. This is because of an autoimmune response whereby the body has destroyed the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. We don't entirely know why that happens in some people and not in others. Type 1 diabetes accounts for about 10% of all cases. It's most often found in the under 40s, and it's by far the most common type of diabetes found in childhood. In type 1 diabetes, the carbohydrate containing food is broken down into glucose as normal. That glucose then moves into the bloodstream. Normally, the body would produce insulin to let that glucose into the cells. But in type 1 diabetes, there is no insulin being produced, so the glucose can't get into the body cells at all. So the level of glucose in the blood rises and rises. The body tries to lower the level of glucose, it tries to get rid of the glucose through the kidneys. That's why people who have undiagnosed type 1 diabetes tend to go to the toilet a lot to pass urine. As the kidneys filter the glucose out of the blood, they also take a lot of water with it, so the person with diabetes will get very thirsty. The urine contains a lot of glucose, and that creates an environment where it's quite easy for bacteria to thrive, so it's also quite common to get thrush or genital itching. In the same way, the blood contains a high level of glucose as well, so more bacteria than usual will tend to breed in flesh wounds, and they might be slow to heal. Glucose can also build up in the lens at the front of the eye, causing the liquid in the lens to become cloudy. That can mean that some people with undiagnosed type 1 diabetes can have blurred vision. Because the glucose can't get into the cells to be used for energy, somebody who's got undiagnosed type 1 diabetes is going to start feeling very tired, lethargic, and unable to sort of go about their normal daily routine. But the body still needs an energy source in order to work properly. So what it does is it starts to break down its fat stores, and that can lead to weight loss. So, the main symptoms of type 1 diabetes are going to the toilet a lot, thirst, thrush or genital itching, slow healing of wounds, blurred vision, tiredness, and weight loss. These symptoms generally happen quite quickly, often over a few weeks, and can be reversed once the diabetes is treated with insulin. Type 2 diabetes accounts for about 90% of all cases in the population. It's most common in the over 40 age group in the white population and in the over 25 age group in the South Asian population. Type 2 diabetes is a little more complex because there's slightly more processes at work. Either the body isn't producing quite enough insulin, or the insulin it is producing isn't working properly. That can be due to being overweight because a build-up of fat can stop insulin doing its job properly, but it can also happen in people of a healthy weight. So in type 2 diabetes, the carbohydrate containing food is broken down into glucose in the stomach and digestive system as normal. That glucose then moves into the bloodstream. The pancreas starts to produce insulin, which moves with the glucose through the bloodstream to all the body cells which need glucose for energy. However, the glucose can't always get into the cells because the locks to the cell doors have become furred up with fat deposits. That means that the insulin can't open the cell doors properly. So the level of glucose in the blood continues to rise. In response to this, the pancreas produces even more insulin. So the blood glucose levels continue to rise and the insulin levels continue to rise. This situation is further complicated by the cells, which are desperate for energy, sending out emergency signals to the liver to release stored glucose. The blood glucose level goes up and up, and the pancreas produces more and more insulin until it can't cope anymore, and eventually it can wear out. As with type 1 diabetes, the symptoms of type 2 diabetes are going to the toilet a lot, thirst, thrush or genital itching, slow healing of wounds, blurred vision, tiredness and weight loss in some people. The symptoms for type 2 diabetes come along very slowly, and some people don't have any symptoms at all. So for that reason, people can live with type 2 diabetes for up to 10 years before they realise that they have it. Type 2 diabetes can be treated in a number of different ways. Initially, it may be sufficient to make changes to the food you're eating and to take extra physical activity or lose any weight that may be appropriate. But type 2 diabetes is a progressive condition and most people will need some form of medication to treat it.
Our muscles are vital. They allow us to move. From about the age of 30, the amount of muscle mass and strength decreases very slowly. In about 10 to 20% of the adult population, this process is faster. This is called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is more common among older people, but younger people can suffer from sarcopenia as well. This video is about sarcopenia. What is it? What is the cause? And what can you do about it? What is sarcopenia? People with sarcopenia, a muscle wasting condition, have lower muscle mass and less muscle strength. As a result, they are more likely to have poorer mobility. For instance, they tend to have more difficulty standing up from a chair by themselves. Climbing stairs and carrying shopping bags also takes more effort, and there is a higher chance of falling and fractures. What causes sarcopenia? Every day, our bodies break down and rebuild protein needed to maintain or increase muscle mass. This is necessary for the body to work properly. There is a balance if the body builds up the same amount of muscle mass as is broken down. With sarcopenia, there usually is a normal level of breakdown, but a lower level of buildup. The balance is no longer there. As a result, the amount of muscle mass and muscle strength is noticeably reduced. This lower buildup of muscle can have multiple causes. For instance, low physical activity, not enough protein intake in the diet, or illness. What can you do about it? To prevent the loss of muscle mass and strength, it is important to eat well and be physically active. By eating well, we mean a sufficient protein intake, as protein forms the building blocks of muscles. Proteins are found in dairy products, legumes, meat and fish, and grains. Proper movement means being physically active for at least 30 minutes every day and doing bone and muscle strengthening exercises twice a week, such as resistance training and daily activities such as cycling and climbing stairs. Balance exercises are also important. Think of standing on one leg, for example, while brushing your teeth, doing the dishes, or walking across a straight line. In illness, sarcopenia develops much faster. In illness, building muscle mass becomes more difficult, and so it is even more crucial to eat well and exercise in order to prevent sarcopenia and minimize the loss of muscle mass and muscle strength. So, especially in illness, a nutritious diet and exercise are essential for maintaining strong muscles.
If you are newly diagnosed with diabetes, essentially this means that you have elevated levels of blood sugar called glucose in your bloodstream. There are lifestyle modifications that you can make that are within your control that will help improve your glucose levels, but also aimed at improving those cardiovascular risk factors, such as elevated cholesterol and high blood pressure. It's important to note that there is no one-size-fits-all dietary plan that you should follow for diabetes. Assistance of a registered dietitian can help plan and develop an individualized meal plan for you, and this has been shown to help reduce your hemoglobin A1C by up to 1 or 2 percentage points. And this, furthermore, can help reduce your risk of other complications. The focus should be on healthful, balanced eating. Unfortunately, many of us don't know what that really means. There are nutrition strategies that have been well studied and can be very helpful to follow. Carbohydrates are certainly not bad for diabetes. However, that answer comes with a caveat because there are some good carbohydrates and there are less healthy carbohydrates. In fact, carbohydrates are an essential nutrient and your body's main fuel source. Limiting the unhealthy carbohydrates, such as refined carbohydrates and sugars, is an essential tool to help minimize those spikes in blood glucose. Refined carbohydrates are those that are made from flours or starches that have essential nutrients and fiber removed in the processing. These refined carbohydrates typically have added salt, fats, and sugars in them, and so therefore are less healthy. Most important is to try to limit the amount of added sugars in your diet. Foods that are high in added sugars are those cakes, candies, cookies, pies that have a concentrated amount of sugar in each serving. We never say never, however, and planning to have a few treats throughout the week is a good strategy, and we can make all foods fit into a healthy diet. Fats are certainly not bad for diabetes because fats do not directly raise blood sugar. However, there are different types of fats. There are two general categories: saturated fats and unsaturated fats. The saturated fats are known to increase the bad form of cholesterol, so we recommend significantly limiting these in your diet. We get saturated fats from highly fatty or marbled meats, skin on poultry, and also whole milk dairy products. We also get some saturated fat from two plant-based oils, coconut oil and palm kernel oil. So be aware of these often added to foods, particularly refined carbohydrates. The unsaturated fats, the ones that are best, are those that also have dietary fiber, which would include nuts and seeds. Also avocado and olives and olive oil and any types of oils made from these plant-based sources are healthy sources of dietary fat. We can use the healthy plate method as a tool to adequately plan your meals. The idea is that we divide the plate in quarters, this way and that way. 1/4 of the plate should come from whole grains or high fiber, minimally processed carbohydrates. That might include a baked sweet potato. It might include a whole grain pasta or brown rice, or oatmeal, or a nice slice of whole grain bread. Another 1/4 of the plate would include some sort of healthy protein. That would be something like fish or skinless chicken. It might even be a plant-based source such as beans and nuts. We would recommend limiting the amount of red meats to no more than 1 or 2 times per week, or even less if you can. Certainly avoiding those processed meats that have more added fat and salt is recommended. The other part of the plate, the last half, should be mostly vegetables with a little bit of fruit. This side of the plate is much lower in calories, very high in fiber and plant-rich nutrients that are excellent for your immune system and overall digestive health. To the side of the plate, we might also have other nuts and seeds, and we would also want to include some healthful dairy in the diet, whether they are plant-based sources such as soy milk or almond milk, or cow's milk dairy, that is low-fat dairy, 1% or skim milk, non-fat yogurt with no added sugars are excellent examples. In summary, when we create a balanced diet, we ensure that you're getting all of the nutrients your body needs, and we would have a diverse meal plan with lots of different foods for you to choose from. And so therefore, we truly can make all foods fit into a healthy diet.
Hello, I'm Pam Blackmer, dietitian at Joslin Diabetes Center. Today we're going to talk about carbohydrate counting. Carbohydrate counting is a method to use to help manage blood sugar levels. With type 1 diabetes, you must match carbohydrate intake and mealtime insulin dose, basically doing what the pancreas would do if you did not have diabetes. Remember that bolus insulin helps control high blood sugars caused by a meal or a snack. You will need to know the amount of carbohydrate in food. This will determine how much insulin you take. Food contains carbohydrate, protein, and fat. These provide calories for energy and nutrients to keep your body healthy. Carbohydrate breaks down to glucose, which is another word for sugar. It has the largest impact on blood sugar level. Protein and fat have little effect on blood sugar. Carbohydrates are starches or sugars. Carbohydrates will raise your blood sugar and require mealtime insulin for blood sugar control. Examples of carbohydrates are starchy foods such as bread, crackers, pasta, grains, rice, potatoes, cereals, pretzels, popcorn, and pizza. and they require bolus insulin. Starchy vegetables are also carbohydrates, such as corn, kidney beans, lentils, black beans, garbanzo beans, baked beans, potatoes, and peas. Non-starchy vegetables are lower in carbohydrates. Examples of these include celery, carrots, tomatoes, spinach, cucumbers, peppers, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, green beans, lettuce, and onions. They may require a bolus dose, depending on the amount consumed. Foods containing natural sugars such as fruit, milk, and plain yogurt are sources of carbohydrate. Even though these foods contain natural sugars and are healthy foods, they will still raise your blood sugar. Added sugars contain carbohydrate. These include syrups, jellies, desserts, ice cream, candy, cakes, cookies, honey, maple syrup, agave, and sugar. Protein foods have little effect on blood sugar. They do not require bolus insulin. Examples of these are cottage cheese, eggs, string cheese, meats such as beef and chicken, and seafood such as salmon and tuna fish. Breading added to meats such as fried chicken or meatloaf may add carbohydrate and raise the blood sugar. Other examples of protein foods are pork, ham, fish, shellfish including shrimp and scallops, cheese, turkey, nuts, hot dogs, bologna, bacon, sausage, pepperoni, and salami. Note that some protein foods are high in fat and sodium and are recommended to be eaten less often for a healthy diet. Fats also have little effect on blood sugar and do not require bolus insulin. Examples of fats are oils, butter, cream, salad dressing, cream cheese, sour cream, and mayonnaise. It is important for everyone to eat a balanced diet of mostly healthy carbohydrates such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and low-fat milk, along with lean proteins and healthy fats. Occasional treats are acceptable. Carbohydrates are measured in units called grams. The average number of grams of a carbohydrate can range between 30 to 100 grams per meal. The amount of carbohydrate that is right for you will depend on your weight, physical activity, and stage of growth. It is important to measure food to know how much carbohydrate is in the food you are eating. Use measuring cups, measuring spoons, scoops, and scales to determine portion sizes for accurate carbohydrate counting. Accuracy with carb counting can help with blood sugar control. Food labels are the first place you look to find out the amount of carbohydrate in a food. Look at the total carbohydrate and serving size. This food has 40 grams of carbohydrate per 3/4 cup. If you have 1.5 cups, that would be 2 servings and equal 80 grams of carbohydrate. If an item does not have a food label, you can use resources such as Calorie King book, Calorie King website or phone app, or MyFitnessPal phone app. These will tell you the amount of carbohydrates per serving size selected. The Upstate Joslin Food Choice List is another resource and lists serving sizes containing 15 grams of carbohydrate. Let's practice carb counting. If you were to have Cheerios, milk, and a banana for breakfast, you would add them up individually. First, look at the Cheerios food label. 1 cup is 22 grams, and since you are having 2 cups, you would double that to equal 44 grams of carbohydrates from Cheerios. For the milk, look at the food label and you see that 1 cup has 12 grams of carbohydrate. Since the banana does not have a food label, you could use the Calorie King app or website and search for a medium-sized banana and find it has 27 grams of carbohydrate. Add them together to get 83 grams of carbohydrate for this meal. To figure the amount of carbohydrate in a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with milk, you would look up each item individually. A slice of bread is 15 grams of carb. 2 slices would equal 30 grams of carb. 2 tablespoons of peanut butter is 6 grams of carbohydrate. So if you are only having 1 tablespoon, you would take half of that, which is 3 grams. A tablespoon of jelly is 13 grams of carbohydrate. A cup of milk is 12 grams of carbohydrate. Adding them all together, you have 58 grams of total carbohydrate in this meal. To figure out the amount of carbohydrate in this meal, search for chicken on Calorie King app or website and choose 4-ounce portion, and you can see that it has no carbohydrate. Then look at the Upstate Joslin Food Choice List and you can see that 1/3 cup of cooked rice has 15 grams of carbohydrate. And since you are having 1 cup, that would equal 45 grams of carbs. Next, search on Calorie King app or website for broccoli, and a 1 cup serving is 11 grams of carbohydrate. The total for this meal will be 56 grams of carbohydrate. In order to have energy throughout the day, it is best to have 3 meals. They should be approximately 4 to 5 hours apart, with low or no carb snacks in between if desired. Snacks are allowed. Your provider will determine the number of grams of carb you can have at a snack. Some snacks are no carb and are allowed anytime. Some snacks are low carb and must be counted so you don't go higher than your snack carb goal. Higher carb snacks may be allowed as directed by your provider. These may or may not require a bolus dose of insulin. The Snack Away handout gives you ideas for low carb, no carb, and 15-gram carb snacks. Your insulin to carb ratio will tell you how much mealtime insulin to take for food. For example, a ratio of 1 to 15 means you will take 1 unit of bolus insulin for every 15 grams of carb. If you eat 60 grams of carb, you would take 4 units of bolus insulin for food, and if you eat 100 grams of carb, you would take 6.5 units for food. The insulin to carb ratio just covers food, so if your blood sugar is high, you will need to add more insulin per your correction factor to lower blood glucose. Checking your blood sugar is the best way to know if your insulin or food intake needs to be adjusted.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our monthly diabetes wellness webinar. I'm very excited to introduce our presenter for today. Her name is Jessica Shipley. She is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist. She has been with Stanford Healthcare for over 12 years, practicing in the nutrition clinic and primary care. Jessica provides individual medical nutrition therapy and works closely with the diabetes and prediabetes patients, teaching both diabetes classes and weight management classes. Today, she'll be sharing some of her favorite and kid-approved carb-controlled fall recipes in this Savor the Flavors of Fall webinar. So I'll turn it over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Catherine. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to watch some of these recipes. As I was brainstorming about some ideas, for this webinar this year, I really like the idea of fall because when we think of fall, we think about flavors like cinnamon, maple, sweet spices. There's the root vegetables, of course, the pumpkin breads and pumpkin pies and apple pies. And sometimes with a lot of these fall dishes, they're comforting, they're tasty, but then, the thing is they come often laden with a lot of those extra carbs. And so my goal with our recipes today is to really show you and share with you some great ways to incorporate these tasty fall flavors into recipes that are carb controlled and that you can enjoy while still keeping blood sugars in great control. So my first recipe, we're going to share the recipe up on the slide so you can see what our first recipe we're going to do. It's called an autumn kale, bean, and chicken soup. This recipe is rich in vegetables, rich in fiber. It incorporates some of those nice fall herbs and spices like thyme and sage, and it can certainly be adjusted based on some of your taste preferences. So the ingredients we're going to do, I'm actually going to get the stove turned on, and keep in mind this is a live demo, so I'm going to do my best to do everything right and not drop stuff on the floor. I just got I have this pot over here, just turned it up on medium heat. I have a little bit of olive oil in that pan with some garlic. I'm going to get that toasting. And then first thing we're going to do is I'm going to add into that olive oil and garlic on the pan. I have all of our chopped up vegetables that are going to go into this soup. So I have some chopped up carrots, onions, and celery, our nice base for this soup. And I'm going to add it right here directly into this pot. I really like to cook with soups because it's kind of a free-for-all with all those leftover vegetables you might have. You can really mix and match with what types of vegetables you have as your base. And then you can fill it in with the different types of flavors and ingredients you have around. While that's cooking, I'm going to give it a little stir and let these vegetables soften a little bit and heat. And some of the prep involved in this involves using kale. This is a really hearty leafy green, and I love to use kale in soups because it really holds up. And it's a really rich fiber, rich in vitamin K vegetable. For those of you who maybe are not sure what to do with kale and you buy it at the farmer's market and store, it comes in these long stalks. You could also do it quick and buy it in the bag where it's already chopped up and clean, that's a great way to do it and a nice time saver. But for the purpose of this, I wanted to share with you kind of how to prep kale if you're going to be cooking with it in a soup or sautéing it. Kale has a really fibrous stem, and some people will eat these, but for the soup you want it to be a little tender. So what you do to help get rid of the stem quickly is you fold your kale. You can kind of fold it in half, and then you get your knife, and then you just run your knife right along the edge of the stem, and it removes the stem right there for you, and then you're left with the nice hearty greens. So I'll do that one more time. Here's my stem, fold it in half, and then we're going to take our knife and cut right along the stem. If I had those professional cameras, they would zoom over and show you exactly what that looked like. But in this recipe, I'm going to put about 2 cups of chopped kale or so, which I have pre-done here. That's going to go in at the very end. So to the soup, I'm going to go ahead and give it another stir. I wanted to do this one first so it can really cook throughout the rest of our conversation today, and I can show you what it looks like at the end. So it's been sauteing for a couple minutes. The next thing we're going to go ahead and add into that is I'm going to add my herbs. So I have a couple bay leaves, I have some fresh sage, I have some thyme, and I have some thyme that's taken off of the stem and then some that's on the stems. To incorporate some of the flavor from these herbs, you could just put them right into the stock and just let it cook with your soup. And at the end, you can remove the stems. You'll get that nice flavor, but you're not going to get all the stems cooked into your dish. So I'm going to add all my herbs, bay leaves, thyme, sage directly into that pot. I'm going to give it a stir again. And then I have a low sodium vegetable broth. I have about 4 cups. The recipe calls for 8. Depending on how much soup you're going to make or how liquidy you might want your soup, you can adjust it, like plus or minus a little bit of that. I'm going to add my low sodium vegetable broth directly to my pot here. We're going to let that cook down. And I also have 1 can of no added salt cannellini beans. These beans are a nice way to add to this soup because there's lots of fiber. Again, this is a fiber-rich soup, so lots of fiber from these beans, also some protein. We can double up the beans, and if you don't have the cannellini beans, you could use kidney beans, you could use garbanzos, whatever you have on hand and what you enjoy. We'll let that cook again. For the canned soups, or the canned beans, I like to get either low sodium or no added salt if possible. For the convenience, you could get them in the can. You could also get them in the dry bean and cook them that way and freeze extras you have and pull them out and add them to dishes or soups as able. But with diabetes, we are often also keeping an eye on our blood pressure. So some of you may be looking for different ways to help to cut back on salt or that sodium. Canned foods can certainly be a place where we get some of that extra sodium. So if you're able to get the low sodium or the no added salt, that's a great way to incorporate that. And notice in this dish, I'm actually not going to be adding any salt in this dish. I like to use at the very end, actually squeeze of lemon on top of a soup or into a dish because a little bit of acid or lemon gives food a lot of flavor. It almost gives it that salty essence. So that's a nice tip to remember when you're trying to cut back on the salt is just use a little bit of lemon juice or some type of acid to go along with it. I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to let this cook, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to our second recipe, and then we're going to come back to this autumn kale and bean chicken soup at the end and finish it up once those vegetables soften and cook down. Okay, my next recipe we're going to be doing is one of my favorites. So I'm going to scoot my ingredients over. This is an apple pie overnight oats and chia. It's also family approved, kid approved. My kids love this and they help me prep these. This is one of our weekly options we do, and it can be rotated with different flavors that you like. So we're gonna do, I'll get this stuff out here. What we start with, this is a quick grab and go breakfast. You can make it ahead, you can meal prep it, you can eat this warm or you can eat this cold. I suggest warming it up just because it gives it more of that nice apple pie flavor. So what we're gonna start with as our base, what I have in this container is 1/4 cup of just rolled whole grain oats right here. When I make overnight oats, I like to use a little bit of a lower ratio of the oats and a higher ratio of chia seeds, because that really helps to keep the carbs down a little bit more, but it boosts the protein and the fiber a lot more when we can increase that ratio of the chia seeds. So if we get, again, we got the 1/4 cup of oats right here in my bowl, and then I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of chia seeds right here into this same bowl. I like dishes where you don't have to use multiple dishes to make something. This is a 1 bowl dish here. Chia seeds, for those of you who haven't really experimented or used chia seeds much, they're rich in protein, fiber, great source of those heart-healthy omega-3 fats. They absorb about 20 times their weight in water. So when we start to add liquid to these and they sit, they swell and they increase in volume. So it almost also gives a dish more of a creamy texture without really adding lots of additional fats to this meal. All right, so the next thing we're gonna go ahead and add to this is 3/4 cup of liquid. Right here, I have an unsweetened vanilla almond milk. If you prefer to use a soy milk or another like an oat milk, you certainly can, but keep in mind if you're using different milk alternatives, some of the nutrition may be a little bit different. All right, and then we're gonna give this a really good stir. You wanna mix dishes that have the chia seeds in it really well. If you don't, sometimes the chia seeds kind of get into these little clumps and it can make your dish dry. So just make sure when you're doing this, you mix it really well. All right, next, this is why it's called those apple pie overnight oats with chia, is because we're gonna add apple pie spice to our chia seeds. And this is what's gonna give it lots of great flavor. You can buy like pumpkin pie spice and use that, but when I made this apple pie spice, it's a higher ratio of cinnamon compared to some of the other flavors. So in this, I made a large bulk of cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cardamom. And I just have this mixed up in a little container and I can scoop it out as I need it. So I'm gonna put about a teaspoon of all these nice flavors into my chia seed overnight oats. I'm gonna give it another really good mix. Those chia seeds here, I'm gonna bring it a little closer so you can see it. They're already starting to absorb a lot of that liquid. All right, so put that in. All right, next, we're gonna add the apples. Let me share with you what that looks like. I have 1 apple chopped up and cooked down, and I added that same apple pie spice into this pan, and then I just cooked it on the stove for about 5 minutes, just until these apples started to get warm and soften, and they started releasing a lot of their natural juices as it was heating. These apples are what is going to give this overnight oats the sweetness without really needing to add any extra added sugar. So this recipe calls for about half of an apple, and that's about 15 grams of carbs right there. So I'm gonna put half of this apple into there. And then it also calls for a 1/4 cup of toasted nuts. I am using here, I have toasted walnuts and pecans, pre-toasted, ready to go, and we can add a whole 1/4 cup of these nuts right into our overnight oats. So we have the chia seeds, the oats, we have our apple pie spice, we have our spiced warm apples, and then we have the pecans and walnuts. No sugar added. This is all meal prep ready to go. I'm gonna put a lid on it. You just let it sit overnight for a couple hours, and then the next day you can take this out enjoy it warm, or you can eat it cold, however you like. If you want to sweeten it, you could always add your own sweetener or non-nutritive sweetener to your taste. All right, so we got this dish down. I'll put this right over here.
These all look really amazing so far. I love how everything's very versatile and kind of easy to prep as well.
It's a great one. Okay, and I'm gonna move some of this stuff out of the way here, where we'll move on to our next recipe. Take a peek at our soup. The vegetables are starting to soften. It smells really good. All right, so we can't talk about fall flavors without talking about like a pumpkin bread or a pumpkin muffin. I wanted to share with you one of my another favorite recipes. This is a, we'll share the recipe up here. This is a chocolate chip pumpkin muffin with almond flour. So it's not going to be your typical pumpkin muffin that you might find at the bakery. There's a few tweaks that we've done in this recipe to help keep those added sugars down. In fact, you'll see that there's no added sugar at all in this recipe. And it's sweetened with using banana, and that's where really ripe bananas is what we're going to use to sweeten this dish. All right, so I'll walk you through what keeps this dish carb controlled, higher in protein. It's also a gluten-free recipe as well if you're using gluten-free oats. So what we're going to do here, in my bowl, I have 2 really ripe bananas that I mashed up, and that's what we're using in here. And again, the banana is what's going to help give this muffin some moisture as well as keep it sweet without the added sugar. And then I've also added half a cup of canned pumpkin, and that is mixed into here. So you can see what that looks like. Just added that in, gave it a nice mix. All right, we're gonna add in next, this is the base of our recipe. So I have almond flour. You can buy almond flour in bulk, but almond flour is essentially, it's just almonds ground up, and it looks kind of like in a powdery like flour, but it's all almonds. So almonds are, again, rich in fiber, rich in protein, great source of omega-3s. It's gluten-free. It helps with this protein and all this fiber. That's helping to stabilize those blood sugar levels. All right, so I added my almond flour. Next, I am going to add a half a cup of gluten-free oats, right interval. I'm trying to tilt this so you can see all the ingredients going in. It's totally fine just to put all this stuff right into one bowl. Minimize some of those dishes to do. And then I have 3 eggs I'm going to put in here. If you do not cook with eggs, or you're trying to maybe keep the calories down, or you're trying to keep some of the fat down, you can definitely substitute when you're baking with eggs by substituting ground flaxseed. And I have that ratio up on the recipe for you. If you want to use ground flaxseed, you could use sort of an egg replacement where instead of 1 egg, you can replace it with 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed mixed with 3 tablespoons of water. So that could be a way to adjust this recipe if you don't use eggs, you didn't want to use eggs in your cooking. And then next, I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit of liquid. This is a 1/4 cup of that unsweetened vanilla almond milk right into here. And then I'm going to add about a teaspoon of vanilla. That's going to give it some nice flavor into there. And then next, I had to experiment with this recipe a little bit because we want to get that nice pumpkin pie flavor. And so we need a lot of those pumpkin pie spice flavors. So I just have a pumpkin pie spice already pre-mixed. I just got it from the store, but just to kind of give you the difference in terms of what's in a pumpkin pie spice compared to that apple pie spice that I used in our chia oats a few minutes ago. This one has cinnamon, ginger, lemon, nutmeg, cloves, cardamom, fennel, and anise. So I'm going to do a whole tablespoon of all this in there. That's going to give it a really great flavor. I just used only pumpkin pie spice. All right, there we go, right there into that bowl.
We have a question from the audience. So you made your own spice mix in the previous recipe. What do you recommend for the measurements of each one?
Oh, that's a great one. So the measurements that I did for that one, let me grab my note here. It's a quarter cup. Let me grab it here. So the apple pie spice that I do, it's a quarter cup of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ginger, a half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and a half a teaspoon of cardamom. So I just did that in bulk. Where did I put it? And then I just kind of leave that in my cabinet and I'll just use it as I need it. It just is a little bit quicker than taking all those 4 spices out all the time and putting them in each individual dish. So I like to make it in bulk since I make these overnight oats quite frequently. Thanks for asking that. All right, the last nice touch that I'm gonna do with these, because I'm making my family loves these and my kids love the pumpkin pie. The chocolate chip pumpkin muffins with almond flour is I'm going to put in about a quarter cup of mini chocolate chips. Now there is some sugar in these mini chocolate chips. You could use carob chips if you want, and you don't have to put them in. But I still haven't added sugar in it, but there is some sugar and some sweetness, obviously coming from the chocolate. Even with that, and adding, all this almond flour and the oats and banana and the pumpkin, these are still very carb controlled muffins. In fact, they end up having about 5 grams of protein per muffin, 3 grams of fiber, and about 12 grams of carbs. So certainly a nice boost. You could use these as a snack. You can warm them up and have them at the breakfast. All right, so I gave us a nice mix. You can see what it looks like. If the lighting is okay.
That looks great.
All right. And then I like to make little mini muffins. I have a mini muffin pan. And about a tablespoon or so, a little bit more, goes into each and every one of these. I'm just going to go ahead and put these in my pan. And then
doing that, we have a question on what temperature should the oven be for these muffins?
These ones, we're going to cook these at about 350, excuse me.
Great, thank you.
350-degree oven. And you cook them, when I actually tested this recipe out the other day, I cooked them for about 22 minutes, and that seemed to be right on the dot. They were cooked really nice, they weren't overcooked. And you can freeze these if you don't eat them all. All right, so almost done here. One other tip here with if anyone cooks with any, actually 2 things here you could do with this. With a muffin pan, I pre-sprayed this pan with some avocado oil just to it helps get the muffins out a little bit easier so they don't stick so much. The other option is if you don't have a muffin pan or you don't want to deal with washing a muffin pan, because sometimes that can be annoying, is you can put this mix right into a Pyrex, like an 8x8 or even a 9x13 if you want really thin ones. And you can do the same thing. You can cook it in the oven at 350 degrees until a toothpick comes out clean from the center. And then you can slice up your bread or your muffins that way into individual servings if you don't want to do the muffins. Equivalently, you could also use just a regular muffin pan instead of these mini muffins. All right, so here we go. That made exactly 24 mini muffins. I'm going to stick this in the oven. It's going to cook for about 22 minutes. We'll check it. So fast forward, I'm going to show you what they look like when they're all done. Here we go. I made a nice little plate for you all to see. So they're so good. These little muffins come out just perfect. I try to make it like a smiley face, if you can see that. So we have our almond pumpkin chocolate chip almond flour muffins. All right, so our next, any more questions about that one, or should we go ahead and we'll move on to our next recipe?
No questions so far, but just a reminder, everyone, you can either put your question as you have been doing in the Q&A module, or you can also just put in the comments.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and move some of my flavors back over here. Our next recipe is a homemade pumpkin spice latte. So I thought, this fall, having nice warm drinks is always really fun, especially when we see all these nice seasonal drinks like the pumpkin spice lattes out there. Again, with watching our carbs, watching our sugar, a lot of these pumpkin spice lattes or these fun fall drinks are often pretty rich in added sugars. I looked them up, some of the small drinks have, up to almost 40 grams of sugar. That's about 10 teaspoons of sugar in just one drink. So I thought, you know what, let's try to make a similar beverage without all the added sugar. So here's what we have. I'm going to start with, I have just in a measuring cup about 3/4 cup of unsweetened vanilla almond milk. Again, you could use another type of milk of your choice. And then we're going to add to that 2 tablespoons of that canned pumpkin. So we got almond milk and canned pumpkin so far. I'm going to give it a nice mix. And then we have to heat this. You can heat this on the stove or you can heat it in the microwave. I'm actually going to pop this in the microwave for 30 seconds. We're going to let that heat for 30 seconds and then I'm going to mix it up. But it's going to help to get that pumpkin puree really nice and warm so it dissolves nicely. And at first I was like, that's kind of interesting having pumpkin puree in the drink. But the nice thing about adding that pumpkin puree is it actually gives the drink a nice texture. It makes it taste really creamy without adding all the whipped cream or all the extra fat that you might get from some of the dairy products. So it's pretty warm. And then I have about 8 ounces of hot coffee right here in this cup. Right, and then I'm going to give that pumpkin a nice mix. And then we're going to get we're going to add some pumpkin pie spice, about 1 teaspoon to this mixture as well. And then I'm going to add about 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Okay. Mix that up. Okay, and then now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add it to my 8 ounces of coffee. That's good. Okay, now for the fun part. I have a frother. This handy dandy little kitchen tool that you can use. And you can, whoops, might splash, but I'm gonna froth this to give it some nice foam on the top. And I'm gonna do it for about 20 seconds or so. And it's helping to just mix all those flavors. And it creates a nice foam right there on the top. I don't know if you can all see that, but you see it's kind of like how you would get if you're gonna go to the coffee shop and order one and you have a nice foamed beverage. But I added no sugar to this. It has a nice flavor. You get a little bit of sweetness from that pumpkin puree and from that unsweetened almond milk, and you have a splash of vanilla. If you wanted to sweeten this with a little bit of non-nutritive sweetener or even adding a little bit of maple syrup, there's certainly room to do that, and you can always kind of adjust this to your preference and to your taste for sweet. All right, so I'm gonna put my coffee over here. All right, so our next recipe, we're gonna go on, we're gonna check back on our soup here in just a minute. All right, so we're at recipe number 5 already. right, so we are gonna do roasted vegetables with spiced delicata squash. All right, and if you've never roasted a delicata squash before, it's a really nice flavor. It kind of gives that nice comfort flavor. Delicata squash, when you roast it, gets a nice, really creamy and sweet texture. So when you think about, those fall casseroles with lots of cheese and cream, try something with a delicata squash, and it can really mimic some of those nice textures and flavors that you might be looking for. We're also going to be using Brussels sprouts and red onions, and then we're going to get some nice crunch from toasted pine nuts, and we're going to incorporate those fall spices, those fall herbs from some fresh thyme added to this dish. So we have our ingredients here listed on the slide. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to mix up all of our vegetables, that delicata squash. I'm going to do it in a large bowl here, and then we're going to roast them all in the oven. But I wanted to share with you all about how to prepare and how to cook a delicata squash. Sometimes you see them at the store and they're really pretty. Lots of people might keep them on their counter in their fall bowls, as kind of a nice decoration. But you actually you just cut them in half. So here's one that's cut in half. And before you cook it, you actually want to scrape out the center here of all of these seeds. So that's what I did here. We scraped out the seeds in the center, and then I just sliced it in little thin slices across. And the reason why I picked the delicata squash compared to some of the other ones is the skin on the delicata squash is really thin, so you actually don't need to peel it. You can eat the skin. It's completely edible, and when you cook it, it gets softened. All right, so I have right here we're going to add to our bowl to mix. We have one delicata squash. It's halved and then thinly sliced. They're cute. They're like little smiles. I'm going to put those in our bowl. And then I have some Brussels sprouts, which are all cut in half. And that's going to add a lot of nice fiber and hearty flavor to the dish. And then some red onions. So the reason why we're going for these flavors, all mixed together, is because we get a lot of that nice natural sweetness from the squash that gives us a little bit of starch. It is one of those starchy vegetables, but it is a starchy vegetable rich in potassium and fiber, lots of flavor. And then we have our Brussels sprouts, which further bump up the fiber. When you roast vegetables, it just gives them a whole different flavor than if you are maybe used to having them steamed or just kind of sauteed, but roasting them really enhances and caramelizes all these flavors together. And especially with adding a little bit of that red onion, because red onion also gets a nice sweet taste as we're roasting it. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil right into this bowl. I'm going to do about 2 tablespoons or so, because I added a little bit of extra vegetables in here. You can season this with maybe what you want to season with. I'm going to add I have some fresh thyme. If you can grow that, you grow this pretty easily in your garden. If you have some pots or some herb garden, or you can buy this fresh at the store, or you can also use a dried thyme in this as well. I'm going to put about a teaspoon and a half, or maybe 2 teaspoons of thyme went right into this. And I'm going to give it a mix. It looks really nice. It smells really good. And this is going to go right into the oven at about 425 degrees. And I'm going to roast it at that temperature for about 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer, just to, once you want to keep an eye on it and cook it until it starts to caramelize and get kind of a nice golden brown color. Some people like to roast their vegetables a little bit more, but once those Brussels sprouts get a little bit charred, they have a nice flavor when you almost give them like a nice char. Look how beautiful that looks. So we're going to roast all these nice vegetables in the oven. I'm going to stick that in here, 425. All right. And fast forward, I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's done. This is topped with some pine nuts. So we have our nice caramelized Brussels sprouts, the delicata squash, and the red onions, cooked with the thyme. And then in here, I have a nice dressing that we can add to kind of give this another little essence. Our dressing here is made with some apple cider vinegar, some olive oil, and Dijon mustard. So I just put that right in here, mix it up, and you can add it right to the hot vegetables and squash. Just about 1.5 teaspoons, 2 teaspoons or so. Top it with toasted pine nuts, or if you don't have pine nuts, you could use any sort of nut, but lots of great textures in this dish, lots of flavors, and quite filling, full of fiber, and of course, this is also carb controlled. All right, so we're gonna go back and we're gonna finish up our last recipe. Our soup has been cooking this whole time that we have been talking over here. So we're going to go back. I don't know, Catherine, if you want to reshare that soup to remind us all that we are cooking the autumn kale, bean, and chicken soup over here on the stove.
Yes, absolutely.
And now that it's been cooking for quite a few minutes, these carrots are nice and soft. You can definitely smell the bay leaves, the sage that we put in here, the thyme. I'm going to go ahead and add, this is the chicken. So this is a rotisserie chicken. So I got a rotisserie chicken, just shredded it. This makes it a really quick dish to prep, rich in protein. If you see the nutrition here on the slide, 1 serving of this dish is only 20 grams of carbs, 25 grams of protein, and 10 grams of fiber. So it's super rich in all of those things. But I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put this rotisserie chicken right there into our soup. I'm going to give it a stir.
Someone's asking, can you substitute any other type of vinegar? I think this might have been for the previous recipe.
In the salad dressing, yeah, you could. I used the apple cider vinegar just because it was, you know, with the apple cider, apple, cinnamon, spice, but you could use a balsamic vinegar, you could use a red wine vinegar. You actually don't even have to use the vinegar. You could use a lemon juice if that's what you have. It's just a little bit of acid. It helps to bring out a little bit of that flavor without adding much of the salt.
Great. And someone else is asking, is maple syrup a better option to sweeten dishes if you don't like stevia or sugar substitutes?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're going to use like a maple syrup or a honey or a sugar, it's going to be an added sugar option, but all have different flavors. In this pumpkin spice latte, for example, you can add a teaspoon of maple syrup, and that's going to be very little tiny bit of added carbs, but a little bit really goes a long way, especially if you don't like the flavor of some of those other sweeteners. So certainly you can, of course, add that. All right, I just added all that rotisserie chicken over there to our soup, and I'm letting that kind of warm a little bit. And then at the very end, I'm going to add in about our 2 cups of chopped kale right here into our soup. And then you just have to let that mix a little bit. And I'm going to let this heat, and then I'm going to ladle some into a bowl so you can all see how great this soup looks. And now I did put the chicken in it, and there's also beans. So for those of you who are following maybe more of a plant-based eating pattern, or you don't eat animal proteins, you can certainly substitute in an extra can of beans into the soup, or you can put some chopped tofu into the soup. You could even add some quinoa or another type of whole grain, and that's also going to be an alternative to bump up the protein in a soup like this without adding the chicken. All right. So I'm going to let that heat for a second. I'm just going to give us a nice little recap on all the great dishes that we have just prepared together. So we had number 1, we have our apple pie overnight chia seed oats. I'm going to put that here. We have our roasted delicata squash with Brussels sprouts, red onions, topped with pine nuts. And we made a dressing with olive oil, and apple cider vinegar. Put that here. We have our pumpkin spice latte. And then we have our chocolate chip almond flour pumpkin muffins. And then lastly, let me ladle up this soup. We can all see how great this looks. All right, you can see all those nice flavors. You see that kale has kind of cooked down a little bit. We have the carrots, the chicken, the beans. We have the sage and the thyme. Lots of fall flavors. It's really almost made, you can almost think about it as kind of like a breakfast, lunch, you know, a snack, and then a dinner. So incorporating all these great fall flavors. I hope you got some inspiration to maybe try some of these carb-friendly dishes, and I thank you all for joining in on this cooking demonstration today.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. These all look so delicious. And yeah, I mean, whipping up all of these recipes in so little time, very, very great for the tips. Getting a lot of thank yous in the comments. And then just one other question, do the overnight oats have to be refrigerated while they kind of gel up?
Yeah, I would recommend refrigerating them. So I always keep them in the fridge and then just bring them out when you want. They can sit at room temperature, you know, for an hour or so, but definitely I would recommend just keeping it cold.
Perfect, thank you. All right. Lots of people saying your dishes look delicious and lots of thank yous. So we can end the webinar here. Our next webinar will be the second Thursdays of every month. So tune in for our next webinar on November 14th. Thank you, Jessica, so much for your great insight and presentation. And we will be sending out the recipes after.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.